RJ in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
You're on.
How you doing?
We're good.
Good. How are you?
All right. So I wanted to ask you about control, and if you've ever, what's the worst that you've struggled through, and how did you cope with that, and how can we show people that they don't have to have something like that to cope with?
What do you mean? Can you be more specific?
You mean how to?
They don't have to be. They don't have to. They don't have to turn to some, kind of a religious belief to cope with something that they can cope. In a different way. You
mean like how do
secular people
be
cope
in control, or how do you deal with others' control over you?
Well, I mean, I've never considered myself to go through like a serious struggle. Mm-hmm. I'm just wondering if you've ever been like a lot of people I guess I know, or not that I know, but I've heard of, or many things like that. Like they've been through, like they've been raped, or they've been. I don't know anyone that's been tortured, but people that have been tortured, people that have been to prison, and in Austin it seems when they're out of control, and they feel like they can't do anything with the situation, they need something. They often turn to something like that.
Right. Yeah, I know what you mean.
Well, so I'm not an accredited psychologist or anything. I know that being through traumatic experiences like that can be very difficult for people, and it's important to, be able to have a support network and have people that you can trust and talk to, and, maybe in some cases have... try to get hold of some resources to speak to some sympathetic professionals. I'm sure that there are support groups for all the particular things you mentioned, like rape and ex-prisoners and stuff like that. I think, well, I mean, probably what you're asking with respect to religion has something to do with the fact that religious people like to sort of prey on those situations and jump on them and say, you guys need to, you need to get God in your life, which is kind of vile when somebody
when something like Columbine happened, right? Yeah. The Christian right jumped on that as they immediately politicized that. They were like, "Look, this is the reason why we need prayer and 10 Commandments in schools. Ever since those evil liberals took that out, this stuff's been going on." Of course, hopefully ignoring a lot of history. But
like I come from a pretty religious background, and I don't want to take away something if they needed to cope, because I know I've talked to a couple people in my family, and I've shown them, I've made them question a little bit, and they've accepted that it kind of, looks a little sketchy, I guess. But I mean, they need it because they've relied on it in the past, and they feel like, they're not saying that there has to be, because they don't read the Bible or anything like that. But I mean, they just need the idea, to be able to cope with things, and it's helped them in the past. So.
Well, yeah, if that's what you're used to, and if that's all that you've had to fall back on up to that point, it's understandable that would be what they fall back on. I think that the best thing to do, though, as a secular person, I mean, you don't want to take away the safety net they've got, because if nothing else is there to replace it with, that's going to be very confusing for somebody who's used to that. So the best thing that you can do as a secular person is just, in your own actions and in the things that go on in your own life, just show how it is that you deal with the same kind of problems or similar problems, on your own, without recourse to religion or faith or praying or whatever, the religious people might do. And just, provide yourself as an example of how, look, there are other ways, there are secular alternatives, there are ways in which non-believers struggle with grief and with, terrible events that have an emotional, psychological impact on your life. There are ways to do it. Everyone's a lot different. People have different experiences and different ways of coping with things. But, the message that religion isn't the only coping strategy is very much an important one, I think, to put out there. And a lot of some of my own experience has shown me that I've just been able to see how very, very religious friends of mine and family members have gone through certain circumstances in their lives But having the religion to fall back on didn't necessarily provide them with answers or guidelines or ways to get out of their situation or ways to improve or ways to actually fix what was messed up in their own lives that they weren't addressing. Right? So there are any number of ways, and you can say there's not just a one-size-fits-all answer for a crisis that you might face. And I think that's the bad message that religion puts out there, is that if you just surrender all of your troubles and your problems to God, then they magically kind of go away. And if you pray and if you're devout and if you do all these things, just put all of your burdens on the Lord's shoulders and voila, it's like magic. It's you. But that's just not. It's not true and it's not fair. You still, at the end of the day, have to deal with what's going on with your life.
If you were put into a situation, because honestly, I mean, I don't know what I'd do, because I think most people push the ideas or those kind of scenarios out of their heads. But if you were put into a situation like that, how do you think you would cope with it? And do you think, because with me, I don't know, what I would do. So,
I personally don't think that I would turn to the comforting make-believe stories. But the thing I do want to say is that I'm not the kind of atheist necessarily who thinks that religion is pure evil and must be stamped out at all costs. I don't think it's generally a positive net influence. But one of the things that I've always thought that religion does do effectively is provide the sort of support network that I was talking about. And it does it very selectively. I mean, it does it by creating an in-group, and by extension, there's going to be an out-group that they generally don't care for in the worst instances of religion. But I mean, one of the things that having a church group to go to will provide you is a group of other people that you can talk to and who will probably often have empathy. And I'd be lying if I said that atheists don't have a long way to go to provide a similar network of friendly and caring people. And I think that that's important. And I think I'm lucky enough to have a lot of good friends that I think I would turn to, and I'm very fond of my family, and I think that they would help me through that sort of thing.
I think that's good,
and I think that society could be doing more to provide like mental health services and things like that.
Another thing I wanted to get at was with rape. Say when people are raped, because I've known someone who was raped in the past. They often, you want to blame yourself when something like that happens, and
that's true.
It's because you want to be in control, and you want to know that you don't want it to happen again. So how are you going to make this not happen? You have to put the blame on yourself. So you can have a sense of control. And
rape is an especially ugly crime in the sense that there's a lot more victim blaming going on than in cases of other crimes. Like if you get robbed, you don't usually expect a bunch of police to come over and the first thing they ask you is, well, why didn't you do a better job locking your doors or whatever?
Well, but that's also, I don't think that's as traumatizing though, because with that, I mean, something as horrid as that, like you don't want it to happen again, and you have to put the blame on yourself so you can make sure it doesn't happen. But it's hard to do that because,
that's the wrong way of going about making sure it doesn't happen again. I mean, there are ways to say, perhaps there are things that I could do better in terms of watching out for my own safety. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're putting the blame on yourself or that you're accepting any of the blame, but it does mean that there are ways that I can protect myself. There are things that I can do to learn to protect. To help friends know how to protect themselves, and a lot of that also has to do with perhaps meeting other people who have been in those kinds of circumstances, talking through it in like a support group situation, and in that way you perhaps learn to get over this whole idea that, well, maybe it was my fault. Well, no, it wasn't. I mean, somebody did something to you. And how can you avoid having that happen in the future? Maybe you can't, but at least you can know that
And if you know someone who is raped, the most important thing you can do is be supportive and non-judgmental of them.
Yeah, of course.
Exactly, 100%.
But I think that's all the answer that we're qualified to give at the moment. So I think we're gonna. Thanks a lot for your question.
Yeah, definitely. definitely. Appreciate it.
All right. Bye.
Take care.